Good afternoon, YouTube. This is Fifth. I am here in the beautiful area of South Lake Tahoe with my friend Eric, the founder of JWStruggle, former elder, former Bethelite, former pioneer, and have the opportunity to speak with him a little bit about his journey and the things that he did as far as waking up and leaving the organization. So Eric, first of all, I just want to really thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me,
this
Cliff.
afternoon. Yeah, definitely. So the first thing I wanted to ask you is, many people have probably heard a lot of your story, but what was your introduction to the Jehovah's Witnesses?
Well, my mom converted when I was a little kid, and I was just raised up like any other witness kid.
I see. As a child, how did you feel about the routine of going to the meetings, or the need to be different out in school and things of that nature?
Well, I went along with the program. I loved my mommy. I was a good boy.
Okay.
I believed in the paradise, and
Right.
she was really good at guilt tripping me into not eating the birthday cupcakes and,
Right.
and not doing the holidays. And I just went along with it, and I took it as far as I could go.
And you never thought anything was wrong with that, not as a child?
Oh no,
Okay.
no. I believe my mom, and so this was the truth.
Right. Understood.
Yeah.
So what were some of the responsibilities, or as Jehovah's Witnesses will refer to them as, privileges that you had, throughout your years as one of Jehovah's Witnesses?
Oh, I did everything. I started pioneering as soon as I got out of high school.
Okay.
And, they made me a servant, and then I went to Bethel for a few years, Brooklyn, and then I left to get married, and then became a young elder. And
Okay.
before I knew it, I had parts on the district convention, regional convention, they call it now, circuit assemblies, and so yeah, I took it as far as I could go.
I see. And just backing up, very briefly, how old were you when you got baptized in one of Jehovah's Witnesses?
I was 17.
Okay. Do you remember what was going through your mind at that time? Like, what made you say, you know what, I want to get baptized?
I felt like I barely made it. I remember telling my mom that I barely made it, and it was a joke because it was always like, you're not even going to get out of high school before Armageddon comes.
Right.
And my whole young life, I was told that the end was going to come before I ever grew up. And so, yeah, that sense of urgency, that Armageddon's around the corner, was just drilled into my head.
Right.
And I believed it. I was very sincere in the religion. I had no other foundation. I just, this was the truth.
I see. So what year was it, more or less? I understand you say you got baptized at 17, but what year was it actually? And the reason why I would be curious, to know that is in relation to 1975, because I understand you went to Bethel in the 80s, correct?
Late 80s, early 90s.
Okay.
I was there. Yeah.
So how, what year was it when you got baptized?
85.
Okay, it was 85. So I guess the 1975 thing by that time was kind of.
Yeah, my mother got baptized like 2 or 3 years before 1975,
Okay.
and that was her comment was, "Oh, I barely made it,"
Right.
and all of that. So
yeah. Understood. I remember speaking with you a little bit earlier that there was still kind of that buzz of Ray Franz a little bit when you got to Bethel.
Oh yeah.
By 85. So I'm curious to see what the atmosphere or the environment was like at that time. So shortly after.
Oh, you mean in
his
Brooklyn?
exit? Correct. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I met all the governing body members, and got some of them I got to know a little bit. But I met every one of them, Franz and Schroeder and Henschel, and I met Fred Franz briefly, but he was like 90 something when I was there, and he was really old, so I didn't get to know him. But I saw some weird stuff when I was at Bethel, but I was so gung-ho, I just stuffed it down. I hid it in that tiny little corner of my mind, and arrogance among some of those governing body members that would stomp around like they owned the place.
Right.
Brother Jairus was universally feared by everyone, and he was just a hard ass from to everyone.
Okay.
So yeah, I saw that, and it made me go but at the time, I believed it.
Yeah.
So I just I didn't worry about it.
You just went along with it.
Oh yeah, I was just amazed to be there.
Right. And if it's anything like my, brief stint at Bethel, you saw things, and even if you saw someone in a position of authority do something that was, not in harmony with the Bible or even the governing body's interpretation of the Bible, you would say, well, Jehovah has them there for a reason, right? You would always find a way to rationalize it.
Oh, I saw elders lie, circuit overseers falsify votes in judicial meetings. I saw some weird stuff as an elder, and again, I just kind of, you know, it freaked me out, but then I just stuffed it in some little corner and then just forgot about it and pretended it didn't happen. And it wasn't until retrospect, when you start to wake up, when you start to get out, then you start to say, hey, what about that? What about that? What about that? And all these little things come into your mind, and you go, you had all these clues, you know, that you were in the matrix, that you were in this fake world, but you didn't have, I didn't have enough data. I didn't have enough information. And around 2010, a friend of mine got DF'd, and he sent me Crisis of Conscience as a PDF file. And I saved it to my desktop, and it just sat there. And every time I'd use my computer, it'd just sit there. And for about 3 months. And then finally one day, I clicked on it and started reading it, and it was just like a gut punch. And because it was true. I knew what Ray was writing was true. It was obvious.
You were still serving as an elder at this point?
At that point, I had stepped down, and I was a servant again. We had relocated to a new area, and they were talking about they were going to make me an elder again. And I woke up in time, and I wrote a letter resigning for medical reasons. I had health issues, you know, because you can't just say the real reason why.
Of course not.
And so I stepped down and got out, and that didn't last long before they came after me. So.
Wow. Okay.
But that's a whole other story.
Do you remember what was the first thing? Because, you know, I say this when I describe my awakening process. You know, I mentioned something from when I was 17, something from when I was 19, but I didn't leave until 28. So those things, I wouldn't even call them doubts. They were just things that would happen that I would kind of reason and say, well, you know what, I'm just not spiritual enough to understand. You know, maybe I'm watching inappropriate movies, or maybe I'm listening to inappropriate. There must be some reason.
Yeah, you and a few others.
Yeah, as to why Jehovah is like, you know, not giving me his Holy Spirit. So my question to you is, when was the first time that you had a legit doubt where you said, wait a minute, like, I think I need to actually reconsider this? Do you remember when and what was the situation? Yeah,
I'd say probably about 5 years before I got divorced from my my wife at the time, who was a very devout witness and still is a practicing JW. And I told her, I said, they keep extending the dates out. Something's weird here, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't have the data, you know, because I wouldn't go online. I would never look at anything apostate, you know, quote unquote. So I noticed there was something weird about the way they kept changing the generation, and I knew there was something hinky there, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't, you know.
So you would say that you would have been one of those very studious Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh, yes.
That when a doctrine thing came out, it wasn't just like, okay, that's fine. You would actually work to try to understand what the doctrine was and what was the new understanding.
I gave over 3,000 parts during the time I was a servant and elder. I served on over 200 judicial matters or elder matters, you know, after the regular meeting up till midnight. So I had a ton of experience. A lot of it I would call bad experience. Disfellowship dozens and dozens of people, and I like to think that I was a loving elder and I helped some people, and maybe I did, but for the most part I was just another tool. I was just a tool for Watchtower.
I see.
I mean, like all of us were.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So what was your process? Again, I imagine that most of the audience has seen the disfellowship, you know, the Judicial Committee hearing, because if I'm not mistaken, was that the first Judicial Committee hearing that was recorded, the one that you put out?
You know, there'd been a lot of audio recordings, all the way back to like Rick Farron, you know, his was so good, but it was always like somebody with a little micro cassette recorder, right? You know, but mine was the first time that it had ever been videoed, and I sewed my iPhone into my necktie. I found it was a hideous tie, and all these little circles on it. Well, the lens of the iPhone was like the exact diameter of those circles, so I cut one out and I undid the back and sewed it in there and had it set up, and it captured about the first, I don't know, 55 minutes, and then it hit the forgive limit and stopped. But I had an audio recorder in my pocket because I wanted to make sure I didn't miss it. So yeah, so it was 3 hours. I spoke from my heart. I told those 3 elders everything that I had learned. I wasn't looking to convert them or convince them, because that just rarely ever happens. But I wanted people to see, this is what a judicial committee is like. It's a star chamber, it's a kangaroo court. And I was very frank with those men. I was very frank with them, and it stands on its own. People can watch it and they can decide for themselves if they think it's a bunch of baloney, if they think it's that I did the right thing or the wrong thing. It's up to posterity. People can look at that and decide for themselves.
Absolutely, absolutely, very much so. How do you feel about? We know how we were taught to believe about apostates, right? Mentally diseased, there's something that said that their dishonest teachings can infect you like gangrene. It was this very intense
disease,
right,
apostates.
This very intense description about apostates, which, if we're going by the witness definition, it only refers to someone who does not agree, who has been baptized as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, who no longer agrees with their teachings, right? We were taught to believe all of these people were under Satan's control and things of that nature. As you've gone through your own personal experience, and by extension, as you have met other people who have gone through similar experiences, how do you feel about what has actually happened in comparison to what you were told would be the way that these people would behave themselves as far as apostates?
Well, it's a great question, Cliff, because here we are, we're at this meetup group.
Right.
We've had over 50 ExJWs here, and people are pleasant. People are people. They're not evil, they're not gangrenous, they're not mentally diseased.
Right.
And that whole notion is just a fiction that Watchtower spins to keep control of their group, to keep the sheeple in line, to keep you down and doubting yourself. They don't want you to trust your gut. They don't want you to trust your heart.
Right.
The heart is treacherous. See, that's a bunch of hooey, because as soon as you start to trust your instincts and your own heart, then you start to think for yourself.
Correct.
And that's the most dangerous thing that could ever happen, because they will lose MIC customers and MIC publishers. Because every Kingdom Hall is just like a franchise to them. We are nothing but numbers to these people. The governing body are not interested in individuals. They couldn't give a fig about you or me and trying to bring us back to Jehovah.
Right.
They don't care about that. They just want us to be quiet and go away so that they can keep the publishers ignorant and docile and in the group, so that they can grow their base and have a lifelong customer. That's the hard truth.
Very true.
That's the hard truth. But as far as meeting folks that are former witnesses, they're just like anybody else. Some of them are nicer than others.
Right.
When I interviewed Bo Jewell and he talked about his book, he said an ex-witness is just another person. Don't just trust them because we used to be in the same club. He goes, people are just people.
Right.
It's not us against them.
Right.
It's us in the whole world together. We are a community of people, and we need to learn to make bridges and not isolate ourselves from society like the witnesses do, and other insular groups do. That's what they do. Scientologists do it. Some groups of Mormonism do it. They want to isolate you and make it some us versus them thing, and people are not like that. That's my experience.
That's absolutely true, and I believe we were speaking a little bit earlier as far as how, as Jehovah's Witnesses, we were very quick to say, that's a cult, that's a cult, that's a cult. But never did we think that, yeah, of course, we're not a cult. We got the faithful slave and God's Holy Spirit. So it's just interesting, especially waking up and realizing, what's the truth behind this. You realize that a lot of the characteristics that define your organization are very similar to the ones that you would very openly refer to as a cult, previously. So, yeah, definitely found that interesting, and I'm sure that's a similar experience that you had. So what I wanted to ask you in addition to that is, of course, there are Jehovah's Witnesses that are viewing these channels. There are people that are starting to have doubts, and then there are other ones who, have already left and are just a little bit lost. Just starting with those who are watching these types of videos, because obviously if you get to the point where you watch these videos, there must be something going on in your head to at least open you up to that possibility. To those who are just at that point, who haven't really come to any specific conclusion, what would be your message to those individuals?
My message would simply be to continue to educate yourself. Knowledge is power.
Right.
Do research. Independent, real research.
Right.
Watchtower Online is only going to give you one side of the story, and you're never going to get anything else.
Right.
It's like going to a communist country and hearing the communist newspaper talk about how great their government is.
Right.
So That's all Wash Towel ever does, is they give you their sanitized version of things. So anybody that's watching this that has those doubts, you're not alone. There's lots of us out here. There's millions of former Jehovah's Witnesses, millions of former Mormons that are out there that have become free, that have freed their minds and are no longer under an authoritarian rulership, and they're allowed to watch the movies they want to watch. They're allowed to have their own conscience and decide how they want to worship or not worship. You know, we all have to find our own way. And controlling groups like the Jehovah Witness religion, they stunt our growth emotionally, developmentally. We don't know how to think. Some of us don't know how to think for ourselves. We have to ask an elder. We have to ask a watchtower to decide if it's okay to go to jury duty. It's okay to go to a church for a wedding of our friend or something. It's just, and you know, now that I've been out for a few years, I mean, it's just absurd. It's just silly that I would. It almost feels like it's somebody else's life, you know.
Absolutely.
So there is life after the cult, and it gets better and better and better. At least for me. And I'm not saying that's the case for everybody, but for me, it's been so much better. So yeah, I mean, just keep pursuing knowledge, you know.
Absolutely, that's a great message. It's interesting what you mentioned about consulting with somebody before you make these different decisions. I remember just briefly, I had an experience where there was a union strike that came up along with my line of work.
Am I allowed to be
and
in the union?
I literally was standing outside of where everyone was picketing, and I was on the phone with the service department. Hey, what am I supposed to do, right? Just on things, just on day-to-day life, you feel that you're responsible, you know, to answer to a group of people or this particular ideology in order before you make your decision. And the freedom that comes along with that, you know, regardless of kind of what turns your journey actually takes, the freedom that comes along with, you know, I'm going to evaluate this on my own and determine that this is right or this is wrong, is something with which especially born in Jehovah's Witnesses are very unfamiliar. You know, they're not used to being able to just evaluate things on their own, you know, on its own merit. So now, as we know that there are many ex-Jehovah's Witnesses that are watching this, people who have either faded or who have, you know, either been disassociated or disfellowshipped. What would be your message? What would be your message to those individuals as you've kind of seen how your journey has transpired?
I like that question, Cliff, because just because you got out, whether you just you faded, went inactive, or whether you got DF'd, don't stop cleaning out that watchtower junk from your head. And I've talked about that on my channel, JWStruggle. Don't stop. You have to clean that thinking out of your mind. Absolutely. There's a lot of people in the cult are misogynistic. They think women are to be silent, and that sort of thing. There's watchtower thinking that stays with you, especially if you were raised in it. You have to work actively to clean that out. It can be doing what we're doing right here, just being friends and having a drink and talking it out.
Absolutely.
It can be getting therapy. You know, Bo Jewell told that, and he said, you gotta get therapy. It really helped him a lot. It may not work for everybody, but it helped him, and it's helped me. You know, so talk to somebody, actively work to clean out your thinking. Bring yourself up to speed with the rest of society. You know, we are a society today where we try not to see color, we try not to see gender, you know, all these things. We gotta free our mind of this baggage, this watchtower baggage. I had a guy, he'd been DF for 20 years. He emails me and said, what do you think about the soul, and is there really a hell, and what about Trinity? And I'm thinking, you should already know all this. I mean, I'm just a guy. You don't need, I mean, what do I, I'm just a person. I'm not some theologian. Figure it, you know, you can figure these things out.
Absolutely.
You know, and that's how you heal your mind, improve yourself. And one thing too, when you get out, you're going to change a lot. You're going to discover who you are, and your belief systems, a lot of your notions are going to change. And that's hard on your family, your friends, your significant others. They're going to see you changing. So acknowledge that, and don't shy away from change. Don't shy away from uncertainty. Embrace it, and just figure it out. Just tackle it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's great advice. That's great advice. Well, definitely appreciate you taking the time.
Yes, of course you do, Cliff.
to speak with us. You know, just on a personal note, you know, your videos were one of the first ones that I was watching as well.
Oh,
you know,
okay.
when I was still kind of trying to, you know, make sure
get the courage and
exactly,
decide. Yeah.
exactly, and then by extension to make my own videos. So I definitely
Yeah.
want to thank you. You know, on behalf of myself personally, but you know, by extension, I think I can safely say on behalf of the ExJW community. You know, especially having that first videotape disfellowshipping hearing regarding apostasy, it really, you know, brought you shed some light on that situation.
Yeah, here's what it looks like.
Absolutely.
When you go in that back room and these
Yeah.
guys are after you, and if you speak up, you know, this is what will happen.
Exactly.
And that's what I wanted. I wanted to speak up. I wanted to let my light shine.
Yeah.
I used that Sermon on the Mount analogy. Really meant something to me. You know,
Absolutely.
I'm going to let my light shine, and you know what? If they have to DF me, go ahead and DF me.
Right.
Spiritually execute me, and that will prove. You know, that will prove whether this is a right or a wrong thing that they're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Very, very good point. Well, Eric, hey, thanks again. Really appreciate you taking the time out, you know, to speak with us.
Glad to talk.
Yeah, and I'm sure many that are going to be watching are going to resonate with the words that I spoke earlier. You know, really just very appreciative for what Eric has brought to this discussion. And as we continue forward, you know, I guess the best we can hope for is for more people to, you know, begin to think on their own. And, you know, maybe, dare I say it, for there to be some changes in the organization to where, you know, people's lives aren't affected the way that they are currently. You know?
Hey, before we go, Cliff, can I ask you a question?
Sure, absolutely.
What do you think of the beard? I'm kidding. I've been getting so much crap over this beard, man.
I think you have to fear the beard.
You have to fear the beard. Respect and fear the beard.
So again, this is Eric, the founder of JWStruggle, alongside with Fifth, bringing you yet another interview. And until next time.